My name is Betsy Marston. I moved to Paonia with my husband Ed and two children, 4 years old and 2 years old, in the fall of 1974. And we came from the New York area because our lives had crashed. I was a public TV producer. My husband was an associate professor of physics. We commuted 2 different directions, and we had a housekeeper who was deported. And the whole very delicate structure of our lives fell apart. And I was kind of an oddball anyway, a working woman with these 2 little kids. And we decided to take a year off. And we knew the Paonia area because we built a cabin about an hour away, below Lost Lake, 9,600 feet of elevation, only a summer cabin. And we would come first to hike, and then to get to know the area, and then to build the cabin and come with the little kids. So it was a refuge in a way. And then when we took the year off, we had to look for a place to live. And as happens in the West, there was an energy boom, and we couldn't find a place to live. The cheapest place was Paonia, and we knew its lumberyard. That's it. So here we settle down. We read the local paper, and there's a big story about a sign at the local paper, a door, hippies stay out. And we said, where have we moved? What is this place? So we began going to meetings and talking to people. And before you knew it, Ed and I talked, and we said, let's start a local paper. And on January 75, we started a local paper, North Fork Times. And I chose the name because it had been a paper back in the 1890s. And so it gave us the freedom to walk around town and say, I'm a reporter with North Fork Times, and I want to know what you're doing and how you do it. And it was like, I don't know, joining the Peace Corps or something. It was bizarre. Here we were, very urban people in a rural situation, and we didn't know where we lived. We had to find out by asking questions and then writing stories. And we got to know really interesting people in all forms of life. Coal miners, there was a union. In fact, there was a strike. We covered that. Public lands around Paonia were undergoing a wilderness inventory. And all of a sudden we realized, oh, all the places we love to hike, it's public land. What is public land? Well, it's the West. It's what makes the West unique, is our gift of public land. And Colorado is blessed with so many beautiful places accessible to every American. So we got to know our public lands. We got to know agriculture. The word organic wasn't in use, but it was all organic. Nobody had money for weed killers. You just took care of your soil, you added compost. We got into compost, we got into gardening, or I did. And what else did we learn about? We learned about small towns and how brutal they can be to each other. We specialized in embarrassing the town council, which had a sweetheart deal with a banker, and with a no interest amount, almost $1 million in the bank, earning no interest when interest was decent back then. So we were crusading journalists covering everything, including the so-called hippies. And we were considered hippies because we were the right age. We were young with children. Why would we? The gas station guy, Bob Reedy, said, why are you here? You were a TV producer. I know you made money. Why would you come to Paonia? And I said, because I was burned out. I needed a break. So to make a long story short, we didn't understand that in creating a local paper to find out where we lived and engage the community in a dialogue, we had created a business as well. We were in business and stayed there for 6 years. But we had no managerial or delegation skills. We didn't know how to hire and manage. So we decided to sell and take another year off, which we had never taken. What my family has done in the years since is go on to found another paper, this one a regional one, called Western Colorado Report. And then in 1983, High Country News in Wyoming, which was a nonprofit, their whole staff quit. They were broke. They needed a new staff. We said, we're not going to Wyoming, you come to us. We folded in our little paper with that little paper, which had a smaller circulation than the paper we had just sold. So in '83, we had to restart a regional paper with a great reputation, but broke. And there were lots of Sturm und Drang associated with that. But we got to know a wider West. We kind of learned from the ground up with our local paper, and now we were learning about Utah. And 83, 84, there was a giant flood. Water ran down the streets of Salt Lake City. You can think of that. Glen Canyon Dam, and this is why we won a major national award, the George Polk Award. That dam was threatened with destruction. It shuttered. There was so much water, they put up plywood around the dam. So what we found was that the environmental stories, the bread and butter of High Country News, were fascinating and on a larger scale. But we kind of geared up for it, and Ed was a terrific talent scout for writers. And I kind of worked with the intern program. I've worked with over 100 interns in my career. And I was a nurturer of the writers. Basically, I would say, I need a writer, can you do it? And then they would rally. And a lot of those writers are quite, I would say, influential today. We seeded the West with talent. Some of them are historians, some are journalists, some are writers, nonfiction. I mean, people have gone on to really great things. Now I'm a widow, and I don't want to talk about being a widow. Yeah, I have no partner. It's very sad. But I now, with my son, have a new job, which is running an opinion service, Writers on the Range. And it's doing really well. So I'm still in journalism after all these years. How do I stay here? The big change for me was not being a successful working woman. I come to Paonia and I'm identified as a hippie. And I was insulted. I thought, this is really obnoxious. The other thing was, journalism was not understood. I covered Hotchkiss Council, Ed did Paonia, and one time early on, one of the councilmen said, are you writing down everything I say? And I said, well, I'm a journalist. I'm going to do a story about this meeting. And he said, oh no, like all of a sudden he'd been exposed. So the journalism that we eventually drove out 3 little tiny paper, including the one who had the hippie sign on his door. They weren't journalists. They even ran stories that said, please post. So it was like bringing the 20th century into a 19th century mindset. And I guess culturally it was a difficult adjustment, although being a journalist gives you freedom to know everybody and to be curious about everything. And we grew to respect a great many people who did live here and did make a living here, and had deep roots. And there was a volunteer ethic back then as well, where people helped each other, During the 30s, they'd had a barter economy. The history of the place was always very interesting to us. And so when we took over High Country News, it gave us a certain distance from the community. We didn't live on it anymore. We didn't need advertising. We didn't even need their subscriptions. We had a national base. So that was very freeing. We were very poor in the beginning. I had never cared about making money or having money. It didn't even occur to me. I just like to work. And I've never ended that approach to the world. But we did good in our beginning years with the local paper. It was tough. But then we began to make it work, and things work out well. And also during one of the frequent energy busts and booms, during the bust we bought some real estate, and now that's our, I guess you would say, my nest egg. What have I had to do to stay here? Well, become more independent. Learn, I think, that there are many people in the West who do not think the way I do at all. I have very different expectations of what life is supposed to be. And I remember my son came home one day and he said, I had a funny conversations. We were talking about what's going to happen after high school. And Dave and my son said, well, I don't know what I'm going to do. And all the boys turned on him and said, what? You're going to college. Because of his parents, because we were educated. There was a line between educated people and not. And a certain defensiveness from some people if they weren't well educated. So there was a class thing in the West. And certainly in the East, but based on whole other parameters. But we felt we were getting to know, in a way, a real America that other people didn't understand or appreciate. I mean, we discovered it as hikers and put down our own roots, but we could see that other people would bop in and out without really knowing where they were. They didn't know ski areas were built on public land. They didn't know the West, and it's complicated. Its water is complicated, its land. So I would say for me, the changes, we're deepening a curiosity and a realization that you don't really know very much, and you have to be a little humble, and that many people who live here who don't have formal education are brilliant in other ways. And whether it's knowing how to grow stuff or fix stuff or run stuff, how to have horses, how to run cows. I mean, they know stuff other people don't. And you have to appreciate that for what it is. And also, I think there's a Western irony and sense of humor that I find hilarious. And they would play off me being very straight and literal. Anyway, I think it's great to live here, and I've always been able to find congenial people who think the way I do enough so I don't feel totally isolated. So I did at times, I have to say, because when you're a journalist, people are afraid to say, for instance, we never smoked pot. I was never interested in it. But when we moved here, a lot of people we knew as friends did smoke pot, but they didn't want to include us because I thought pot was for slackers, to tell you the truth. Now I think it's for old people who need to go to sleep. So anyway, and have you adapted? I'll never understand the politics that seems so self-defeating. a certain ingrained opposition to the federal government, although we are the people who take a great deal of federal money. If I were to leave the area, what would I would miss the people I've come to know and love, and the view from my backyard or from my kitchen window. Thomas Hayden, who started Students for a Democratic Society back in my day, he said, who you are is what you see out of your kitchen window. Well, I see Mount Lambourne, 11,400 feet tall, the patron mountain of Paonia and the North Fork, and I think this is like a movie. You watch the weather come through. So the mountain's really important to me, and I've climbed it several times, and the ashes of my father and my brother are up there. And when it snows, I think, and it melts, and they're coming down. But anyway, the landscape, being close to nature, living with deer in the backyard. I had 20 feet away. They were just bedded down with their big ears, and it was fine. I didn't disturb them, and I protect what I don't want them to eat. So people, the landscape, the public lands, I guess the continuing story of the place. I haven't talked about the way it is now, which is quite different, where land values have rocketed up, and where people here want to make a living with tourism, with recreation, with a very short window of time to do it in. So I really don't know whether we can eat the scenery and live on that. I don't know how young people can afford to live here. And you certainly don't want trust funders parking here. And so I don't understand how we're going to make an economy work here, to tell you the truth. I know we have to try because we have nothing else. Because we have a moribund coal industry hanging on, but it will never hang on for long, or not hold on for long. So I'm puzzled about how we're going to survive. And I've gotten to know a town 11 miles away, Hotchkiss, and it has a strong agricultural base, a traditional ranching base, generating more value, well, I guess it's value-added ag, whether it's fruit or wine. I think there's more community in Hotchkiss than there is in Paonia, which I'm surprised to even say. It's a different form. When the rec district got $1 million in grants to do their ball fields, I went to the celebration because I was involved in a foundation that had given them some money. So many people there had volunteered their time to build these ball fields. And one person had it in his will that the money would go there. And when the pool, which is right near the ball fields, was flooded last summer, they had that pool dredged and cleaned in a day and a half. And if they hadn't done that, it would have destroyed the filtration system. Now, would that happen here? I don't know. I know what we care about here is the downtown. It's a retail economy we care about here. And we care about, we have 100, how many nonprofits do we have? I can't count on, and I'm one, writersontherange.org, so what can I say? I'm a part of that. But I know we have a volunteer ethic here that's very, very strong. But I fear that they're older people who are in that volunteer cohort. And what I want to see is the young ones coming up. Because when I moved here, there was a split, quite true, between the young hippies, who were new people, and the old guard. But I think a lot of the young people were willing to learn and didn't have much money. You could live on nothing in the 70s, and I mean literally nothing. You could park in an orchard people did, they put up tents. So, but now I don't see that, and I don't see cheap housing for you know, so I'm concerned that we don't have a viable way to live here. So, but it's just another iteration as this town grows and changes. On the whole, it's, for me, I sort of love what we have here. I love the fact that we have a theater, that we have the Blue Sage Community Center. There's a lot for us here to be engaged in.